On social media, this couple portrayed themselves as the loving family of a 3-year-old boy. But beneath the Facebook posts and the words of love, they were allegedly hiding a secret. And that secret was how they really treated this toddler, according to police. Now, we have the shocking allegations of what deputies in Georgia said this family did, allegedly forcing that 3-year-old to live in a shed for weeks without water or electricity. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. These are the kind of cases that are really difficult to talk about. Cases of abuse and neglect, according to deputies, and especially when it looks from the outside that this was a family trying to give off the perception, allegedly, that everything was okay. Here is that family. Sara Pombert and Joseph Turner. They live in Douglasville, Georgia. It's about 20 minutes outside of Atlanta, a little bit more of a rural community than you'll find inside the perimeter of ATL. Now, police say they lived off the beaten path a bit, down this road in a home that apparently had a shed in the backyard. That shed is no longer there, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Pombert regularly posted on social media about her son and being a mom, and she also posted about the man in her life, that boy's dad. His last name, Turner, Joseph Turner. Now, in this post, you can see that they appear to be a happy family of 3. She said Turner and the young boy were 2 peas in a pod. The collection of pictures shows that boy opening presents on Christmas, their house decorated for the holiday. You can see a tree in the background. And Pombert posted this video of her son with the caption, "So this is going out of my comfort zone, but I have to show this. My son tonight was the funniest, sassiest little bugger you would ever meet. I love you." This post was in April of last year.
What are you doing?
But as we all know, the story of social media, especially in cases like this, can be incredibly deceiving, and that is allegedly what police say was going on in this story with this couple. We have the search warrant that Douglas County deputies executed on the Turner and Pombert house in March of this year. Deputies say that Pombert and Turner forced the boy, the same boy that you saw on social media, the one that they said they loved so much, to live in a shed for weeks. Now, the backyard shed didn't have water, it didn't have electricity, according to deputies. Quote, "The accused kept a dirty living space in a shed without running water or electricity and left the child unsupervised, unbathed, and unclothed with criminal negligence." The warrant also said that the offense happened between May 1st of this year and May 22nd of this year. Before we get back to this case out of Georgia, I want to talk about something really important. This is a Law&Crime legal alert. If you received a Depo-Provera birth control shot and were later diagnosed with a brain or a spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the description of this video, or go to www.forthepeople.com/LCDEPO to see if you qualify. Pombert and Turner are now charged with second-degree cruelty to children. It is unclear if they have lawyers. Right now, the authorities haven't released a lot of information about this particular case, other than what we've told you just now. But according to local media, we may have learned how deputies came upon this alleged situation, this alleged case of neglect. A neighbor spoke to WSB TV in Atlanta when the news broke of the arrest. The neighbor was pretty blunt that he wasn't a fan of this couple. The neighbor telling WSB, "With the lifestyle they live, I'm not surprised by any of that, really." Now, in terms of what he meant by lifestyle, he didn't go into more detail, but we did find some pictures of Turner with the boy on his lap, and you can see they're holding a gun. Now, it's a hunting rifle, it appears. For many families, that's a rite of passage, but I could see how some families would look at this and they'd have some questions. Now, as to how the authorities came upon the alleged horrifying discovery, the neighbor told the TV station that the shed went up in flames Memorial Day weekend. The neighbor said the fire had explosions and the fire department had to come into the house. And he says it was then they potentially discovered what might have been happening in that shed behind the house down the street. Joining us now is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. Thanks for being with us. It's just a tough story to read about when you just think of this young boy and what deputies are saying. What stands out to you?
This is unfortunately these situations happen more often than not, and this is becoming, critical. Uh, the fact that they put a 3-year-old by themselves in a shed for weeks on end, and people did see the kid. I guess they thought he was happy, but nobody, the neighbors. I don't know how distant they are from each other, but this is all again, these situations happen so often. There was a movie I watched, and I'm just going to paraphrase. You need a driver's license to drive a car, but any a-hole could be a parent. And seems to be one of those where they just abandoned this kid and left him to fend for himself for weeks on end. And there's not enough vigilance that we can have in law enforcement and to protect these kids from parents who just seem not to care.
That's the thing, and it's just we've talked about so many cases like this that have happened, and this couple was one. I found the mom's Facebook, and you would think that this is the most loving family you've ever seen by looking at the Facebook page, and then you see what police say they found, and it's a completely different story. How often is there this facade on the outside that everything's okay, but then you see something like this happen where deputies say that they came upon him allegedly being kept in a shed.
Yeah, I sometimes, and this is only again, these are speculations.
Sure.
These families, these parents, kind of go into this. Everything's okay. I'm raising my kid the right way, and they see nothing wrong with what they're doing. Everyone's raised differently, but you have to. The one thing is you fail to have this child thrive, and that's where it is. I mean, you want to raise your kid a particular way, religion, whatever it's going to be, but you have to give the basic allotment of food, water, clothing, and that's what you're seeing they weren't doing. So I don't know how they can separate themselves from that, but some parents will say, I was doing the best I could with what I have. But the reality is they're not doing they're not doing things that you're supposed to do. And to leave a kid out in a shed, it's just boggles the mind. I mean, parents sometimes don't realize what they're doing. Uh, you know, People use sometimes, physical, spanking a kid, and then it gets too excessive, and then you have injuries to the kid. They're thinking they're raising the kid the right way, their child the right way, but that's not. I don't know where they got that from. I know what Parenting 101 says. What do you do with your 3-year-old? Put him in a shed for a while and see how they handle it.
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, there's always this debate in parenting about, whether, spanking, that's something that seems to have been phased out from at least when I was a kid to now. But it's like, this is a 3-year-old, being kept
Yeah.
in, it's Georgia. So it's not like it's getting, sub-zero temperatures, but it's still, happening in May, and you don't know what the weather is going to be by any sense. I mean, I know it's really hard for police because in a lot of ways you don't want to encroach on a parent's rights and all of that. But how do you as law enforcement take on these cases? What can we do about them?
Well, when we get the case, or when investigators get these cases, we're going to do a thorough investigation. We will visit the home, check the refrigerator to see if there's food for the kid. We're going to see if there's any injuries to the child. But we only get involved. The police only get involved after there's a complaint, and that's the thing. Maybe we have to look toward educating people better and parenting, or what the needs are. Social workers are the ones that sometimes notify law enforcement when they see something that is going on that's considered criminal. And then that's where it comes down to the treatment of this child, this 3-year-old, is criminal based on the laws that are out there. And when police get involved, it's after the fact. It's usually if it comes to a serious injury to a child, it's when they go to the hospital. Unless other neighbors are involved with this and other people are actually seeing this. And a 3-year-old is not necessarily going to school, but that's the thing too. Teachers are also mandated reporters. I know in New York State they're mandated reporters. If they see something that looks out of line for the kid, they notify their supervisors, they notify child welfare and the parents. So these are things we have to look at more and more when it comes to child welfare. And one of them, I think, is education for these parents to show this is right, this is wrong. You can't leave your kid out of the house, out of the residence, to fend for themselves. It just doesn't work.
What type of training do members of law enforcement go through to prepare to investigate these types of cases?
Well, depending on the agency, depending, New York City Police Department has a special victims division, and they have an adult side and a child side. So they get trained into how to forensically interview children, ages of 3 and 4. These seem very difficult, and they're not swearable in court, but we do speak to them, we do interview them. Sometimes we have the specialist when it comes to special victims, but most law enforcement agencies, when it deals with kids, when it deals with children, may not have the proper training to interview them. But as far as the work it's done, a 3-year-old, I don't know what a 3-year-old is going to tell you at that time, but we're going to look at in a holistic approach. We're going to go to the residents, we're going to interview the family members, interview the parents, look at their residence to see if there's ample food and clothing and things like that. If we see an empty refrigerator, that's a sign to us that the kid may not be eating. Looking at the child, seeing weight, these things you may not get training, but it's the experiences you get as an investigator. But it is best to have people or investigators trained to interview children, because that's really what it comes down to. And 3-year-olds, that's difficult for an adult to talk to a 3-year-old. And not only that, the parents may have already trained them. I mean, I've taught these kids, don't speak to strangers, don't talk to the police. These things do happen.
I also think too, I mean, and thankfully from what we've read in court documents, this isn't an abuse case in terms of physical abuse of a child. But what are the challenges that you face in investigating these cases where a lot of what police may find at a scene, and I'm speaking more generally here, but it's all kind of word of mouth and trying to figure out what was going on, as opposed to there's someone who has a broken bone or a bruise on their body where you can look and say, clearly something happened here. And then you end up finding yourself, I imagine, going through trying to figure out, okay, is this harsh parenting? Is this unique parenting? Or is this a case of neglect?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's a failure to thrive in a sense. We have to look at, again, the amalgamation of situations or amalgamation of evidence that leads to that fact that they're failing to thrive based on how they deal with this is where corporal punishment, can you spank a child to an extent you can, is it bad parenting or is it criminal? Criminal becomes when there's an injury. Failure to thrive comes into the fact that if the child doesn't weigh, there's a weight height idea, or at least the weight height, if they're underfed, you can see those things. But you also will need doctors involved, you may need to have the physicians. These cases sometimes are misdemeanors, sometimes are felonies. It depends upon what is done to the child. The endangered welfare of a child, for the most part in New York State, is a misdemeanor. And not only that, now the issue is, what do we do with the child? Does that child get removed from the home based on the fact that the family failed to thrive? Or are they going to get the assistance to learn and educate and inform the parents that these are things you cannot do with your child? And one of them is to leave, whatever it may be. One is to leave them abandoned. We've seen these happen on countless times where we've had people go to Atlantic City to go gamble when left their 5-year-old at the house by themselves. And when they come back, they get arrested for endangering. The child then gets into ACS, Administrative Children's Services in New York City, or child services maybe in another city or another state, how they're going to handle it. But I think a lot of times we're looking to fix the family and to fix the problem. When it comes to physical injury and child abuse cases in that level, we take it that's going to be criminal, and that may be having where the child has to be removed from the custody of the parent. This is where it looks like it was not the smartest thing to do, to continue that lifestyle and have that kid outside. But can this be a reparable situation? Can this be repaired? It's possible, but you really need intensive work by social workers and child care social workers involved in it.
Social work can be an incredibly thankless job because we often hear about social workers when they make a mistake or someone falls through the cracks, and you have these horrific situations. Unclear if this family had any interaction with the social care system beforehand. And I'm more asking this generally again. When it comes to making the decision of whether a child should stay with a family or go into foster care, in your experience, and I know most of that is in the Northeast, how thorough is the system by and large when it comes to making these determinations?
A lot of times we err on the side of keeping the family together, and and we've seen that happen in many instances where ACS, the Administration of Children's Services, would rather have them go back to the family, and that's what they're trying to do. Whether or not there'll be follow up, but the follow up is by social workers within the system that are overburdened with numerous cases. So that's why a lot of these things fall through the cracks, where these cases are inundated. You do with 20 or 30 or 40 cases of bad parenting or abuse cases. You triage them accordingly. But this case, could this eventually have been an abuse case? We don't know. I mean, physical abuse, that's the thing we look at. And that's where the issues come into it. Do you break up the family on situations where it's a failure to thrive? Or do you find a way in which to work with the families? And these are things we have to look at, because law enforcement, we try to wear many hats. Law enforcement tries to wear many hats. Social work, we're limited. We have our criminal investigation, and this is where some of this type of incident is. We have a criminal case. We're following up on the law enforcement side. What will be the aftercare as a result of that? What will the determination by the criminal justice system in regards to the parents? Will they do something for them, or they just send the child to foster care and then handle it accordingly? So, this has been the age-old problem. What do we do? Do we break up the family, or do we educate and inform this family that they, to be a better parent, to better parent their kids?
Well, I think too, for the initial responding officer who may not be a specialist when it comes to special victims, and this kind of goes to your point about how law enforcement has to wear different hats, because as you know, you could be called to a dispute over neighbors because they got leaves in their yard, or you could be called to something like a murder. In this case, I mean, how do you prepare as someone who might be that, just a deputy, not just a deputy in terms of what they do, but I mean, someone who has to be prepared for any situations to then walk into a case where you have to recognize something that may be a case of neglect? How do you prepare for that?
That comes to the training, and this is what we have in law enforcement, that some of these agencies do not have the adequate training for their deputies, for their personnel, because of finances and resources and availability. That's the one thing when you have an agency that, the academy gets you to a certain point. You get 6 months of training for the most part in most agencies, and sometimes it ends there. So a lot of what you may see here is the life experiences of the individuals, the law enforcement officers involved in these first responses, and seeing something that is out of turn. And that's the one thing. My son is 23. He's my stepson, and I've been around him since he's grown up, since he's much older than an infant. So my experience with infants is limited, but I also know what it takes to make sure a kid has enough adequate food, shelter, and things like that. And that's from life experience and the training that we get. But some of these agencies, these officers, overburdened with work, may just go to this routine job, or what they consider a routine job, and see what they see, and step away and just say it's what it was. We looked at, in the old ways of domestic violence cases, a lot of times police departments, police agencies took these as personal matters, that we weren't involved. Even if there was an injury to the one of the parties, if they didn't want that person arrested, we'd walk out. We've changed policy, at least in New York is concerned, when it comes to domestics. So the same thing when it comes to child cases. You have to be really hypersensitive to that situation, and it takes time. We're seeing these cases time and time again about law enforcement, but it's usually after the fact. And when they get there, we can make our notifications, we make our statements known to social workers, and then if it's not deemed criminal, they'll take care of it. And we abide by that until the criminality comes up. And that's the problem with a lot of these cases. We have to kind of wait until something happens that's illegal.
And on the point, I mean, one thing I noticed, WSB, which is a TV station here in Atlanta, covered this story. They talked to a neighbor of this family, and he said something along the lines of, based off their lifestyle, I'm not surprised that this happened. And that's one thing. It just tells you about how that neighborhood is, and everybody's had neighbors from time to time that maybe you don't like. But at the same time, here's someone who might have seen something, and maybe they didn't see neglect, didn't see abuse, but what can a neighbor do in that situation where clearly something was happening that he didn't think was great, but then nothing really reached to the point where maybe he saw neglect? I mean, how do neighbors from a police perspective can be better in helping identify these cases to prevent cases like this from happening in the future if, this couple's found guilty of what they're accused of?
Well, I think a lot of it comes to communication. You have to talk to your neighbors. You have to sort of engage with your neighbors, especially with kids. How's this? Small talk is one of those ways in which you develop rapport, you build an understanding, and you can say, oh, how's little Jimmy? How's little John? You could see them. People see a lot of things, but then you get back into the mind your own business. It's not your problem. And then eventually that situation has exacerbated where the police involved, their arrest made, the child, in this case, fortunately did not die, but the child dies or is seriously injured. And every neighbor goes, well, we saw the sign. So if you see the signs, you can notify social services if you see that, and let them, if you don't feel comfortable about that, have them investigate it. But this is the issue with that family, is no one had an unusual understanding of that. It may be a cultural thing. It may be something that he might have been raised, the parents might have been raised in that sense where you let your kid do what that's how you handle it. We have seen instances where we've arrested people from foreign countries. I think it was maybe Sweden. We saw them, they had their baby carriage outside the restaurant and they left their baby in it. And we could say it endangering the welfare of a child. They left them abandoned. But it comes to fact that that's a cultural thing for some people. But so that's where you could see maybe that neighbor saw it as that's how they live, that's the expectation. But nobody knows until there's an investigation. So if you don't feel comfortable about engaging that person, you see something, it may not be criminal, but maybe social services can get involved. And that's where maybe that teaching and education for these parents may be beneficial, as opposed to maybe somebody who beats their kid on a regular basis.
Yeah, and hopefully in this, eventually there'll be some sort of positive resolution in this case. I mean, certainly from what we understand thus far, the accusations are pretty disturbing. You hope the little boy at the end of the day is going to recover well as we learn more about it. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us to talk about this.
Thank you for having me, and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.